Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Lyoko Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episode 73 of Code Lyoko, Replika. And I don't really care for this episode. Well, pretty much what's going on is that in the beginning of this episode, we see that Odd is playing a video game and he's pretty much just pulling an all-nighter, much to Ulrich's chagrin. But he does end up following through with it, but as a consequence, the next morning he's pretty much conked out. He's sleep deprived, and unfortunately, because of that, he doesn't want to go to classes. As such, when the rest of the group, sans Yumi, because she's not in the same gym class as them, goes to get him for class, he says, "No, I can't do it. Aelita, think of a good excuse for me." Aelita at first is like, "No, I'm not going to do that." But come phys ed, when Jim is calling for names, Aelita gives the excuse that he was feeling sick and went to the infirmary. Jim at first buys this, but he ends up going to the infirmary himself as he ends up trying to as he tries to do a jump to try and show what they're going to be doing that day, and he ends up hurting his back. As such, when he gets to the infirmary and doesn't see Odd, he questions it, and the nurse confirms that Odd was never in that day. So later on, we see Jim and the principal going to Odd's room and finding him asleep, and at that point, and put simply, he's screwed. As a result, Aelita and Odd end up getting 4 hours of detention, and the end result is both of them just getting angry at each other. As Odd blames Aelita for getting him into this because she couldn't think of a good excuse, and Aelita is getting angry at Odd because, well, this is because he's the one that decided to skip phys ed, and she's also suffering for it. So pretty much now they're just at each other's throats throughout the whole episode as they're constantly bad-mouthing each other, insulting each other, refusing to acknowledge one another, just pretty much just being general dicks to one another. Which ultimately even goes further ahead when Herb, Sissy, one of Sissy's lackeys, the kind of oafish one, so to speak, he asks Aelita to spend a magical evening with him by the moonlight, which she accepts, but she ultimately has to put a pin in that, as Jeremy states that at that night he wants them to explore the replica that they found 2 episodes prior. So Herb ends up asking Nicholas to accompany him, and it turns out the moonlight vigil, so to speak, was going fishing in the river by the factory. However, as the group is running to the factory, Nicholas and Herb manage to end up overhearing them, and the end result, well, specifically they end up overhearing Odd and Aelita as they bicker, and they end up following them, though they're tracking further behind because Nicholas was having trouble with because whenever the kids enter the factory, they always swing on these ropes, and apparently Nicholas is afraid of heights. But bottom line, Jeremy does manage to virtualize the group into Sector 5, and they take the skid through the network to go to the replica that they found. And something I kind of like is that once they take the skid into the network, they actually have like a teleportation system set up so they can just go in, and all Jeremy has to do is set coordinates, and it'll bop them right to wherever they want to be in the network. So I like that. So he ends up putting in the coordinates for where the replica is, and the end result, and as such, the group goes in to investigate, and once they go inside the replica, they find what looks to be an exact copy of the forest sector. And when Jeremy looks into the code for this place more, it turns out that, yeah, this place is an exact copy of Lyoko, except instead of having, like, all the regular sectors, it's just the forest sector. And Jeremy posits that if there's one out there, then Jizana could have created others. So, with that in mind, the group brings a skid in, and they all teleport off so they can explore this place. However, because Aelita and Odd are constantly bickering, Yumi and Ulrich decide, okay, you know what, you guys can stay behind and go and guard the skid. We'll go and explore. As such, they go behind, and and at first, Odd and Aelita are just kind of defiantly not refusing to acknowledge one another, but they end up having to stop that as the skid ends up getting attacked by 2 tanks and William. As such, they end up briefly putting their differences aside, though Jeremy ends up having to step away from the computer as Nicholas and Herb are getting further into the factory. They end up causing enough of a disturbance so that Jeremy hears them and says, "I gotta find a way to get them back," especially because he has to get rid of them because unfortunately, with the attack on the skid, he wound up funneling in some power from the supercomputer to reinforce it, which means that certain functions are unavailable, which includes return to the past. So they need to get rid of them before they discover the supercomputer. So Jerry manages to lead them astray by constantly moving them around the factory until they're back on the main floor, and then Jeremy manages to use the elevator to get back down and lock it so that Nicholas and Herb can't follow, but unfortunately, even with this in mind he knows that they're not just going to go away. As such, back in Lyoko, the group manages to send William and the tanks back, but unfortunately, Odd wound up getting devirtualized because he was almost knocked into the virtual sea, so Aelita had to devirtualize him before he fell in. And they still have the problem Nicholas and Herb. As such, Odd says he has a plan, but he needs Aelita, so they devirtualize her, and with Jeremy's directions, Yumi is able to pilot the skid back to Lyoko. As such, once Aelita comes back out, Odd pretty much tells her, "We gotta pretend that we were here for a romantic rendezvous," which Aelita, of course, is a little shocked with, but ends up going with as they take the elevator back up, and when it opens up, Nicholas and Herb see them making out, which results in them pretty much just walking away. And the next day, when they try telling Sissy about it, she doesn't believe them, and just when they try pointing it out to her that say, "Hey, they're actually a couple," they just see Odd and Aelita arguing again. So as a result, Sissy just smacks Nicholas while Herb laughs. But back to what's important. When the group devirtualizes, Jerry makes it clear while there are probably plans to continue exploring the replica at some point in the future. Jeremy also states something that's actually kind of terrifying. He states that if there is a replica of Lyoko out there on the grid, then that means that somewhere on Earth there is another supercomputer that Xana has infected. And unfortunately, because of how everything operates, they can't just destroy it. Their powers are all exclusively on Lyoko. And odds are they can't just get a plane ticket to go to whatever other country there is out there. So Jeremy says that if they want to destroy the supercomputer, then he needs to find a way to virtualize them from Lyoko into the real world without the use of the scanners. So that's kind of the next big plot point, which I'm actually interested in finding out, which I'm actually interested in hearing about, and it actually is kind of funny consider if you remember the pilot, because while I haven't seen the pilot, I have heard that apparently in it involved the kids actually having powers in the real world, so I like that. So yeah, overall, I think this is a dumb episode. I'm just gonna say it. The plot important stuff I do legitimately like, because while we don't get a lot, it is cool that they were able to explore the replica, and the revelations behind it, I think are actually really interesting and can build for further plot stuff later on. As Jeremy actually does posit a rather good theory that if Xana is able to create a replica of Lyoko out there on the grid, then that means there could be others. There could be others. And considering that Lyoko is stored within a supercomputer in the factory, then that means that there is another supercomputer out there that's powering this replica, which is actually a really interesting idea that makes you kind of think just how far does this rabbit hole go. Which I like that. It actually helps make everything interesting and keep you invested in what's going on. It adds to further plot progression, and it does open up the possibility for seeing where else we could go with this and seeing how it develops. Although, again, it does lose little points in the beginning because we don't really get to explore the replica that much. But they just touch in, and all we know of it is that it's a replica of the forest sector, so we don't really know where else it would go. So otherwise, it's a nice beginning, and the implications surrounding it are interesting enough so that you want to see more of where it goes, especially with the group, especially since the replicas are kind of like a completely different area altogether. And if you're wondering why my arm is hanging over here, my dog is right here, and I'm petting him, so yeah. But anyway, yeah, I do like that sort of thing. But the thing that keeps me from liking this episode is the B plot with Aelita and Odd, because it is annoying. Like season 1 and 2 Ulrich annoying. Like, if you remember my vlogs for those seasons, you remember that one of the things I absolutely loathed was when Ulrich got pissy. Because back in those seasons, Ulrich was just, if something got to Ulrich or he got mad enough, it would get to the point where it would start to hinder the group because he just couldn't let it go. It was annoying, and I didn't like it. And this episode is like that, but for Odd and Aelita. Because throughout the whole episode, they are just insulting one another, bickering. If they can take a chance, if there's a chance for one of them to take a pot shot at the other, they took it. And again, this does kind of make sense for teenagers. Teenagers are that immature, can be that immature, and think that they're they're in the right. But it is annoying, like super annoying. And it gets to the point where even the other characters pretty much tell them, guys, get the hell over it. Personally, I think that the best way they could have resolved this is if they just talked, which they did briefly do in the episode, but it wasn't really a lot. But, I'm sorry, that's getting ahead of me. But yeah, it was just super annoying. Like, they just kept, it got to the point where it was actually slightly hindering the mission. Ulrich and Yumi pretty much just said, look, we are sick and tired of you guys, knock it off. And that's exactly what I was thinking too. I was thinking, guys, you're on an important mission exploring this whole uncharted territory out on the internet. Do that! Focus on that! If you guys want to argue, do it out somewhere else or do like slight jabs and insults. You're on an important mission to save the world! Seriously, it's annoying. Like, super annoying. And it just kind of makes you want to say, just knock it off. It helps, and again, I know it makes sense because it's teen drama, and teenagers can be that annoying sometimes. But again, this is the fate of the world. It's kind of going back to one of the more infamous examples that Ulrich has done, the Marabunta episode. In that episode, Aelita's life was on the line, and yet he just did nothing. And here, it's kind of a similar case. They're exploring this entirely different realm out there in the internet. Something that's obviously been created by Xana that they need to explore and see and look around. And the implications surrounding it are that Xana is controlling some other supercomputer out there and is using it for his own machinations. And yet they're still bickering because Aelita came up with a piss poor excuse so that Odd could sleep and they got attention for it. Like, what the hell? It's just, like, really dumb. It's just dumb, and it really got annoying. Like, throughout the whole episode, I just kept thinking, whenever they made an insult at each other or just or acted like that, I just kept thinking, grow up. Which I know is a bit strange, because again, they're teenagers, but you just want to tell them to shut up! I'm sorry, it really got annoying throughout the whole episode, and the resolution was a bit too quick, in my opinion. I do, now, to be fair, when people, that's part of the reasons why I like having characters be in a group, because when they're put in a life or death situation, suddenly those little problems don't feel as important anymore. And thus, when they were put up against the tanks, and William and had to protect the Skid, they realized, they wound up putting their conflict aside and worked together. When Odd almost fell into the virtual sea, Aelita saved him by devirtualizing him, and Odd was able to think of a plan to get Nicholas and Herb out of their hair. I just think that it would have been, and I just think it would have been better if we had actually seen them talk to each other and say, "Look, yeah, I was being stupid. Look, I was being stupid. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have put you in that position. Apology accepted. I said that you're probably in the same thing I am. I think it would have been nice if we had seen more of that, because Aelita was trying okay, but I feel like they all just should have talked. I feel like that would have been nice to be a benefit from them actually talking a little bit more than just like one or two lines, because that's all they got. Because that was all they got before the tanks attacked. Just maybe have some of that. It feels like it resolved a little too quickly. So yeah, that's kind of what keeps me from liking this episode. Just the constant bickering between Aelita and Odd. Now, in a way, this does kind of help showcase more of Aelita's development, because as a character, we see not the character in this season and a bit last, also season 2, a little bit. We see her be more outgoing, be more willing to snap, be more quick to temper, be snarky. And while she's still ultimately a kind person, we see her developing more as a character and a human being, which I like that. But again, when about 75% of your episode is just two characters bickering to the point where it actually starts where it could start acting as a hindrance to your mission, it gets annoying. Even if it does feel like it's in character, if it's done too often, it'll just make you want to yell at them to shut up. Which, yeah, does happen in the episode, because even Ulrich and Yumi get sick of it. But, yeah, that's what I didn't like about the episode. Otherwise, the major plot important stuff I think is interesting enough. But otherwise, because I do like that, because it sets the groundwork for more plot important stuff later. But again, otherwise, while I liked that, the whole thing with Aelita and Aelita and Odd. Sorry, I always get their names confused, even when I know who they are. That whole conflict between them, I think, was dumb, and at the end of the day, it kept me from fully enjoying the episode. Not awful, but I didn't like it. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, I liked them setting the foundation for future episodes, but yeah. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I at least hope you somewhat enjoyed this vlog, and I guess that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you next week. Take care.